Okay, you guys can hear? Fine?
Yep.
It was funny, I was just talking with Cornelius backstage, and he was mentioning, we had a great variety of different talks today, so I'm hoping no one else has talked about Ginger Rogers, Slinkies, or black holes so far. I won't talk much about myself. Ginger is much more interesting. I've been doing UX design a little over 20 years in the Ottawa area. So all those people who remember the 90s, I'm one of them. And I'll be chatting a little bit about my experience in selling, delivering various things. I'm going to be using analogies, obviously, to discuss that a bit. So Ginger will be mostly about the buying and selling part of UX. And when I talk about selling, I don't mean wireframes for $50. I mean the actual experience of discussing, exploring, figuring out what the right thing is to do with UX. Delivery, I do actually mean delivery in black holes. Well, you have to wait and see. Okay, Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, super, super famous in the 30s. Even if you weren't born in the 30s, which I'm sure none of us were, you'd probably heard of them. Fantastic athletes, performers, and Fred was actually kind of more famous and got more accolades than Ginger, which was maybe kind of unfair, as this next cartoon suggests. I'll let you read the cartoon if you haven't heard this before. So what Ginger did was pretty cool, right? So, and in a dress too, which didn't, if you look at those dresses, it didn't look super comfortable to be dancing in those. I kind of think when you're doing the selling and buying of UX, there is a kind of dance, and I think the UX designer is a bit Ginger, and I think the product owner is a bit Fred. And again, I don't necessarily mean you have to be a consultancy like us. Even if you're internal to an organization and you're in UX design, you're very familiar with the fact you're probably selling and educating all the time. So I think, that didn't show up very well, but I think we can learn about selling from Ginger. So one of the things that we love to talk about in UX design is process, but I think one of the things that people love to actually hear about are results. So one of the things I've found in discussing UX design that's very powerful is if you focus on case studies, portfolios, etc. I love to fall back and talk about the process. I don't know why we love process so much. Joel was talking about process here a while ago, and it's super important, but when someone's buying it, they need to understand the results, case studies, portfolio, etc. This is actually, I think, the most important slide in the whole presentation if you're going to pay attention to it. I think one of the things that really makes UX design work at the beginning and then all the way through is when you're connecting with someone on the other side and you actually figure out shared values. So not just shared interests. When I talk, sometimes I'll talk to a client and we'll both love NFL football or something like that. That's a shared interest. Shared values are something deeper. My friend Lorraine, who's going to be thrown into a black hole later, I don't know where she went. There she is. She will be thrown into a black hole later. She's great at selling healthcare because she passionately believes in all the great stuff you can do with UX design and healthcare. And often you're working with clients who have that same belief. Now, it's really hard to get at people's values, and the first time you meet them, but you can scratch the surface and you can start to make that connection. And that connection between other human beings when you're doing this stuff, and designers are usually very passionate, caring people, is something that can really make the sell different. And it gets rid of all those combinations about, or all those conversations about, price and all that stuff, because you focus on something that really matters. Goals and things like that are important too, but I think values are like the most fundamental important thing. The other kind of tip that I've found makes a big difference is not just talking about how smart you are, if you can actually show people what you're doing and so if a collaborative design session that's short, walking through their software, explaining the issues it might have and why, and then discussing it, actually engaging them in design, right? How would you create a protocol? So again, not just go back to the process diagram and talk about how you do it, but actually bring it to life for them while you're selling it. And again, it doesn't have to be consultancy. Internally, when you're talking to your friends at the NAC, right, because their website's not working, you can have those conversations. One of the things about that talk, I forget the gentleman's name, that I love is he really brought it to life. Right? When you actually start talking about the problems and showing the warehouse and stuff like that, you bring it to life. So buying. So the buying person on the other end of the sale is the product owner, or someone who's taking the responsibility of the product owner. And so they're Fred. They're leading the dance, right? And one of the things that I would request people who are out there who are the product owners and bring in the UX designers is please lead the dance with business goals. Lead the dance with stuff you know about the users. Lead the dance with context. Do not show me, please, a wireframe with a button in the right-hand corner and saying we think it should be this size because we have that requirement. One, that's not a requirement to say what the size of the button is in the picture. And two, it's starting in a place that's not going to help the UX designer. Now that's pretty basic stuff for most people, but it's still easy to fall into talking about the design, I think, a little too early. If you can back up and start with the business goals, the value proposition, those really high-level contextual things, it can make a huge difference in what comes out in the delivery stage. Again, for the product owners, appreciate UX design as a difficult profession. It takes years to get good at this. I think we sometimes do a disservice if we give a one-day course in UI design, and of course they're out there, that's fine because you can learn stuff in one day. But if we're leaving, people with the impression that they can design, then that's a problem. You don't see one-day courses for astronauts or something like that. You have space camp, I guess, if you're 12 or something. But you don't have a one-day course. I mean, a one-day course for, I don't know, for an astronaut would be like the little monkey astronauts that they send out into space. Sure, you can put the little helmet on and send them out there. But you're not an astronaut, and you're not coming back to a parade. You're just gone. So the same thing with, it's irresponsible to give someone a one-day course in UI design and think they're going to get a parade, right? And then the other part is you can't plan everything in the selling stage. In fact, it's funny when I'll set up proposals in our company and stuff, and then the first thing that happens is the first few weeks is everyone redoes the proposal to some degree, because there is an art to it. There's stuff that evolves. There's things you can't anticipate, so you can't choreograph the entire end-to-end what's going to happen through the delivery process, which is part of the reason for things like Agile or Lean UX. Now I'm going to talk about Slinkies. So Jennifer, you're going to come up. Do you need help coming up? All right. So let's have a hand for Jennifer. She's nice enough to So I don't know, we probably won't be able to see the effect here, but what we're going to see is first you're going to imagine what's going to happen when Jennifer lets go of the Slinky, like this gentleman here. So I'm going to give you a couple of options. So when she lets go of it, it might fall as one unit to the ground, it might collapse upwards, maybe you've seen this on YouTube, or it might do something else. So Jennifer is going to drop it, watch it carefully. Now, might have been hard to follow without super slow-mo, so fortunately, thank you. Fortunately, we have a slowed down picture. And what actually happens, which is kind of surprising to some people, is that the bottom of the Slinky actually stays there, hovering, and the top of the Slinky comes down until there's basically a wave of information that gets to the bottom and tells the Slinky that it can now fall to the ground. If you want a more detailed, actually accurate explanation, feel free to talk to me after, and I'll tell you what happens. But it behaves in it's a super simple thing, a Slinky, right? It's just a little bunch of wires. And yet, it's really subtle. So, can't see the subtle again, but Slinkies in UX delivery Right? In a way, it sounds like it should be easy. Draw a bunch of pictures, we'll give them to the developers, we'll talk about constraints, and we'll get it out the door, right? Anybody who's actually been involved in UX delivery knows that, in fact, it's a very complicated and subtle process. And I think subtle is a better word than complicated, even. The thing I think that is worth focusing on for designers in that process is the subtlety of the relationships between you and all the other stakeholders. So, in particular, one of the things that I've done and I've seen others do that's easy to understand is designers are very passionate people. They believe in the design. You're advocating for the user. But it's important you don't forget that it's the product owner's business. It's somebody else's business. So somebody will own the responsibility of the business, the product, and you don't want to get in a tug of war with them. Right? You want to advocate for your users, but you don't want to get in a tug of war with them. So in fact, it doesn't mean you don't want to argue with them, right? Or discuss things with them, or defend the users. But I've seen people arguing about the design. And I think when you're arguing about the design, you're arguing about the wrong things. So one, when you're having a discussion, you should actually be thinking you're arguing for the product owner, as well as the user, because you're trying to help them. Right? And that's where, if at the beginning, right, in that when you're being ginger, if you'd actually had that discussion about shared values, it makes those discussions easier. Right? So as you go along, if you've had those discussions about shared values and shared goals and shared interests, the battles become less of a battle and more of a discussion. And you don't get the polarized activities that you sometimes see. I mean, we've seen a lot of, there's engineers over here, here's the UX designers, and everybody's unhappy with what's going on, right? And it takes a lot of effort as a UX designer to be ginger and dance backwards in high heels, but I think it's worth it, and this is one of the things that I think is worth remembering. Fight for the product owners too, as well as the users. Product owners, you should appreciate the craft, right? So one of the things that's hard to sometimes appreciate in design is that designers don't design by sitting in front of a computer designing, right? It's a creative process. And at times, designers design by walking around. Designers design by going and looking at something else. Designers design by, going shopping. Literally, people are designing things who do this for a living. The problem's not going to leave their mind. They're going to be so into it that they're going to try and solve the problem, and all of a sudden they'll come back and they'll have the solution. So it's important as a product owner or project manager or anyone like that to recognize that just because someone's not at their desk creating a wireframe doesn't mean they aren't designing. And to that point, it's because design is probably not, unless you've gone through it or taken a bunch of courses or actually done it, it's probably not exactly what you'd think. This is true for any craft or field, of course, right? And product management's not what you think unless you've actually done it and so forth. But it's just an important, yet incredibly obvious thing to remember, but super important, right? Unless you do it, it's probably a little bit different than what you think. So black holes. So now we're gonna, well no, I'll throw Lorraine into the black hole in a minute. I'll describe what it is first. So, this isn't quite the updated slide, is it, Rob? I like it. It's got a certain eclectic feel to it. So, that's it. In case you don't know what a black hole is, I'm going to describe how they come about. So if you take a star, a sun like ours, and at the end of its life, it will stop burning the hydrogen or helium or whatever elements in the middle, and then it will have nothing to push outward to stop the gravitational pull that exists because it's made of stuff and gravity pulls things together. And so it'll go through some death throes and stuff, but eventually it'll start pulling itself towards a smaller sized object. And if it's big enough, it'll overcome the positive and negative repulsion of electrons and protons and so forth. It overcomes the quantum mechanical forces, And it literally just winks out of existence, kind of like the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland that just left behind its smile. It just leaves behind its gravity. So that's all that's left. There's no star. There's just a kind of sphere of inky blackness. And it's inky black because the gravity is so strong that light can't get out. And that border between where light can escape and can't is called the event horizon. And I'm going to throw Lorraine into the event horizon for the first time ever. Okay, so, and she just learned how to go into event horizon 15 minutes before the presentation. So we'll see how she does. And off she goes into the event horizon. There. So we think we have one of the big, in the middle of the galaxy. Lots of galaxies, actually. So what happens is you saw her freeze in time, and if she'd been able to actually redshift her light, which would have been a lot to ask for, you would have seen that happen too. But what happens is, in a black hole, the gravity is so strong that there's a gravitational dilation effect, and it's obviously pretty complicated, but basically what happens is the high gravity slows down time. And what could that possibly have to do with UX design and delivery? So I'm gonna tell you a true story. Is I made up this presentation about 6 weeks ago. And for the life of me, I couldn't remember what I was thinking when I came up with this. And I did know it had something to do with black holes. So Jennifer and I were flying back from California, and it's, this is 2 days ago, I think. I got nothing. I still have nothing. And so we thought, well, I could just end the presentation and say, universe is pretty cool, though, isn't it? Right? Nothing to do with UX design delivery. But fortunately, Jennifer's smarter than me. And we started talking about time. And something is different about time, in not a gravitational black hole sort of way, but something is different about time for different people and projects. And project managers, sometimes product owners, other people, look at time, literally time is money, and you allocate it to designers, for instance, or you allocate it to engineers. And you give them so much time, and that's why we have designers sometimes filling out timesheets, which generally drives them crazy. Someone said to me, what if we could design a great timesheet? And I'm thinking, no, the great design would be if we got rid of the timesheet altogether. That would be the great design. So my friend Francis, actually, we're having this discussion, and now read it for a second. I'll explain it. It's a great quote. So some of you have probably figured it out. It goes back to the mulling thing. So when he says we could do a lot more in less time, what he means is you could hand me, as a designer, less time to do my stuff. But if you gave me more elapsed time, so I could reflect, think, be creative, talk to people, then I'd actually spend less time doing what you're charging for. Right? And this discussion I've had with a lot of designers. They hate they hate being on a schedule. It's hard to be creative, it's hard to be insightful, it's hard to be imaginative on a schedule. And you have these discussions, when we first merged with our engineering half of our company, they'd ask questions like, are you halfway through the design yet? And you ask a designer that, what do you mean halfway? Well, if you got half the number of wireframes done. Well, no. What have you done? Stuff. I'm thinking about stuff. Are you going to get done by Friday? Oh, yeah. Totally going to be done. How do you know? I'm thinking about the right stuff. So time is a very, very strange quantity to designers, just like the radio. And if you can respect each other's view, because the project manager is dealing with this time is money and the timesheets and so forth, but the designer is dealing in a totally different world. So I don't have here's a whole bunch of solutions for how to deal with that, because if I did, then we wouldn't have timesheets at our company. That's my goal. I want to get rid of timesheets at our company. But I think just that knowledge across those different disciplines is useful to think about and reflect on when you're going through any project, because there is a trade-off there, right? If you really want someone to be creative, imaginative, innovative, putting them on a completely closed type structure is not going to do that, right? It doesn't mean there can't be time pressures, you avoid them, but you can't put everything in a completely structured process. So the summary, right? So time is sort of interesting for different people on the project. You should keep in mind it is a different entity. If you're going to be Ginger, right, you got a tough job, but it's worth it. You can bring something great to life if you're the UX designer. I would really focus on that because designers tend to be good at this. What are the shared values we have that are really going to drive this relationship with the buyer? And as the buyer, you know, don't run over Ginger, and it's hard dancing backwards in high heels and stuff like that. If you're coming at them with design solutions, you know, the heels will go flying and Ginger's going to be on the floor. You need to be coming at it. What's the context? What is the business drivers? What's that basic background information that's going to help the designer? And UX delivery is a tricky art. And you know, you can't just set out a project plan. There's a whole bunch of other things to discuss and think about when you're doing it. And I'm done.